Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome to our Hamilton the Musical supplement episode. Today we are going to hear the stories of the other two Schuyler sisters, Angelica and Peggy. But first we want to thank all of you around the world who are listening. We really appreciate the love and are excited to keep bringing you more historical stories. Please make sure to drop us a line on our Instagram, Lit Story Podcasts, as we'd love to get your thoughts through DMs and comments. Today, we're also going to start a new little pre-segment to our stories by sharing some interesting tidbits that we came across in our research that relate to but don't quite fit into the stories themselves. I personally found out that Catherine Schuyler, aka Mama Schuyler, became quite famous herself for setting part of their land on fire as the British advanced during the Revolution. There is a painting entitled Mrs. Schuyler Burning Her Wheat Fields on the Approach of the British, 1777, and I will share a photo of the painting on our Instagram page as it is quite beautiful. I honestly, though, feel for the poor dog watching all of this happen. Kat, what did you find out?
Mine is on a slightly more serious note. Well, okay, on a slightly more recent note, and therefore a slightly different tone. 2020, Mayor Kathy Sheehan of Albany, New York, announced that she signed an executive order to remove a statue of Major General Philip Schuyler, aka Papa Schuyler, from the city because he was reportedly the largest owner of enslaved people in Albany during his time, which makes sense because he was white and wealthy as fuck. But yeah, it's a little bit of a different note.
It makes sense because they were one of, the top families in Albany,
For sure.
too.
They owned a lot of land. Like, they were very, very wealthy, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly how wealthy in relation to Peggy later, but yeah, it makes sense historically for the time, but it's just kind of like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, you couldn't be one of the people back then who was like, this is the thing that we shouldn't be doing? No?
Not in the 1700s. I mean, the Civil War happened in, the 1800s, so it took them a while to figure it out.
True. I did find, connected to this little tidbit, though, I did find a letter from Lafayette where he directly talked about finding a connection with, African Americans of the time and wanting freedom for them then. So that part of Hamilton was kind of legit. Lafayette really did want for that. So yeah, I thought that was neat. There was somebody.
Right? And I get to talk a little bit of Lafayette as well with Angelica. I'm going to talk about Angelica Schuyler today. We probably first heard about her through Hamilton the Musical. At least that's the case for Kat and I, because we're Canadian and we didn't really learn anything about Hamilton the same way the American school kids did.
Yeah, seriously.
I don't think I have anything about him in my history classes, if I can remember correctly.
Nah, we went over, brief details of, the America, the beginning of America, the Revolution and everything. We did not go into detail.
No.
We got the Cliff Notes version, for sure.
So Lin-Manuel Miranda brought the history of the American Revolution into worldwide knowledge, and by doing so, he also introduced us to the Schuyler sisters. We got a lot more information about Elizabeth Schuyler, more commonly known as Eliza, in the musical, but Angelica and Peggy were at least mentioned. Sadly, he did leave out Cornelia and Catherine Schuyler, but I guess there's not enough room in a musical mainly about Alexander Hamilton to tell everybody's story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm focusing my attention, as I said, on Angelica. This is because I always love seeing where creative minds perhaps have fudged the real history of people in order to make it work with their vision. We've heard a little bit about this in the Bonnie Parker episode, but I'm continuing the theme here. This time, however, Angelica's not a criminal, but she's still very interesting. Mm-hmm. Angelica was born February 20th, 1756, to a pair of very, very wealthy parents. Philip and Catherine Schuyler both came from Dutch wealth that dated back to the early colonial days. Her mother was actually a descendant of Kilian van Rensselaer, one of the founders of New Netherlands, which then I had to Google. New Netherlands was one of the original colonized areas that was on what is known as the East Coast now, basically spanning that entire area. Some of the more lesser settled areas at the time of it being known as New Netherlands are part of the states like New York. So they've been there basically since they kicked the indigenous off.
Yeah.
The Schuyler family has been there.
Right.
The Schuyler family had 8 children who lived through adulthood, with Angelica being the eldest. Kat's gonna do a deep dive into Margarita, aka Peggy, in a little bit. Unfortunately, though, for the matriarch, Catherine Schuyler, she did lose 7 children sometime between birth and them reaching adulthood, which I found, like, super sad, especially with Angelica probably seeing most of her siblings pass away. The Schuylers lived basically right in the middle of the Revolution. Philip Schuyler was a general in the war and would bring home prominent leaders for drinks and most likely revolution talk. One such visitor in 1776 would change Angelica's life and family dynamic for a very long time. And that visitor was none other than...
Alexander Hamilton.
No!
Oh!
I will continue to do this every episode if I can.
Me too.
This would be John Barker Church. He was a British-born merchant who became quite wealthy during the war by providing the American and French armies with supplies. There's 2 different rumors about what might have sent John over to America. One is that he was on the run to escape tax creditors after his business in England went bankrupt in 1774. John was employed by his uncle, also named John, at the London Assurance Company. The bankruptcy was reported to be caused by too much speculation on the stock exchange and gambling.
So, like, tax evasion.
Yeah.
Is, okay. Okay, great start. All right.
The other rumor is even more fun, as it would be an interesting tie-in with Aaron Burr for later.
Oh boy.
John may have been on the run after killing someone in a duel. Honestly, I don't understand why, like, the lyrics would be that Angelica found a wealthy husband who isn't a lot of fun. John's life could be a whole podcast on its own, if I'm being honest. Like, this is a man who had a major hand in multiple parts of history.
What? All right, okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
just like the whole, like, the rumors behind how he got to America. I'm like, he's fun. He's not.
I want to know if they're founded in, like, anything real or if they're just completely made up and, like, propaganda against him or something. Like, I want to know if that's, like, legit.
I think it is legit, like, that he was on the run from something. It's just, which one is it? Is he on the run from murdering somebody? Because apparently the business actually went bankrupt. Like, that is true. It's just, was he on the run from the tax creditors, or did he kill somebody in a duel and then had to run from England?
That's fun. Great start. Okay.
So General Schuyler had heard about both of these rumors and was under the assumption that John Barker Church was not a great guy, which was likely true, if we're being honest. Like, neither one...
Fair, if those are your 2 options, like, yeah.
But Angelica didn't care. She was enthralled with this man. So rather than asking for her father's blessing, the 2 of them eloped in 1777.
Okay, so that is such a pattern in the Schuyler household. Like, I swear. Like, okay.
It wasn't an elopement like you would expect in the modern day. Rather than, like, heading off to Vegas, the couple went and got married at Angelica's grandfather's house before they moved to Boston. She was 21 years old.
Yeah.
The couple then started to have children. While they were married for the first 7 years, however, John was hiding under a fake name, which Angelica took along with him. So rather than being known as the Church family, they were the Carter family.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Because I saw Angelica, like, being listed under multiple different names. She was Angelica Schuyler, she was Church, she was Carter, and I was like, what is going on? Like, has she had multiple husbands? Like, but I didn't want to look into it because it's your story, so, like...
Yeah, no, it's because,
that explains it.
It's because her husband was under one name, and so then for 7 years they stuck with that name. So this is where I get to point out one of the major differences between history and our musical. So Lin-Manuel wrote Angelica as a single woman out looking for a man and then sacrificing her love so Eliza could have Hamilton. The truth of the matter is that Angelica was already married for 3 years and had 2 out of her 8 children when the sisters actually met Alexander at the Winter's Ball in 1780.
Okay.
And then she moved to Europe with her family 3 years later.
Oh my word.
So definitely Lynn was, I mean, he's admitted that he took, like,
creative liberties.
Yeah. But I mean, she was actually already a married woman and had 2 out of 8 of her children.
Oh my goodness. I did catch that there was another line I can't remember which source mentioned it, but one of them did. In the same song, Angelica made a mention about, like, my father didn't have any sons, so I'm the one who had to social climb the one.
Yeah.
But that wasn't true.
Yeah, there's two. There was 2 boys and then the 5 girls.
Yeah.
And in Lynn's book about, like, in, like, the actual, like, Hamilton tome, like, big giant book, he does point out that he's like, I don't even know why I wrote it that way. But then when I realized it was too late to change it. It was already working so well. So he just kept it in there.
That's kind of funny. That's just a matter, like,
That's
a
just
little
hilarious.
bit of oversight. Like,
Yeah. So once the family moved to Europe, they all lived in Paris for 2 years while John was in the U.S. envoy to the French government. This is where she befriended Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Lafayette. When I first started, like, the song Satisfied, I honestly wonder, like, why the whole Benjamin Franklin with a key and a kite, you see it right, line was in there. But now I have a feeling this is actually a nod to her friendship with the man.
Oh, that would make sense.
Like, her family and his family were, like, really close. Angelica's beautifully warm, charming, and energetic nature did her very well in life. She was considered to be the life of the party and made friends with very influential people everywhere she went. Satisfied was, like, my favorite song from Hamilton, but now that I'm really learning about the woman behind it, her life seemed more than satisfying to me. Like, she was very satisfied, I think, from the get-go.
Fair enough, but here's an interesting note, though. There are plenty of people that live, like, very satisfying lives that are never satisfied with it, like Hamilton himself in the musical.
True.
So I wonder if, like, the same impression was had about Angelica and about her life, where she's had all these things and, like, she should be satisfied, but will she ever be satisfied?
True. Yeah, because I'm like, even though, like, when she met Hamilton, she had chosen John for herself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she didn't marry just because marry him just because she had to. Like, she actually went against the family to marry this guy that she wanted. She did have brothers, so it wasn't that she had to marry wealthy to keep the family status, as we kind of talked about. And John was anything but a bore. Like, he was passionate about wealth and status, the same as Alexander was. And he was actually the one who brought all the famous people to her, including her even in business meetings and valuing her insights.
Yeah.
So I'm going to finish with the general history of Angelica's life, and then I'm going to start tapping into some of her personal acquaintances, such as what she was chatting up Jefferson about, because yes, there are letters between them in the Jefferson archival fund.
Mm-hmm.
When John finished his time in Paris, the family came back to New York in 1785 for a brief visit. They then settled in London, where she became friends with many diplomats and artists, as well as, get this, hosting balls for the Prince of Wales, who would then become King George IV. Like, she was not bored. She's hosting balls for the friggin' Prince of Wales.
I mean, yeah, if you're not satisfied with that, I don't think you ever would be satisfied.
No.
Oh boy.
And many of the
What
people
a life.
many of the people that she befriended in Europe continue to be close confidants no matter where she moved with her family. Like, they were all besotted with her intellect and trusted her to give them advice.
Damn, girl with a reputation, but, like, in the best way.
Yeah. She made various trips back to New York as she was invited to the inauguration of George Washington. And she also attended events with her father when he became the Senator of New York. At the same time, Angelica's husband was a member of the British Parliament until 1796. He was a force to be reckoned with, as he would swap sides depending on how he personally felt about the decisions being made. Through it all, the family continued a great friendship with Lafayette and even assisted in his release from jail after the French Reign of Terror. The entire Church family moved back to New York around 1799, just in time for John Church to supply Alexander Hamilton with the pistols used in the famous duel. In fact, he had a really big relationship with Hamilton. He had hired Hamilton as his lawyer and commercial agent, loaned Hamilton a significant amount of money, attempted to save Philip Schuyler's life prior to the duel with Eker, even though the same pistols that were given to Alexander were given to Philip for the duel. And he had even supplied valuable information to Eliza about the affair between Alexander and Maria.
So he was, like, in the thick of all of this. Holy.
He was, like, right in the whole friggin' thing.
Was he ever mentioned in the musical at all? Because I feel like he
Only
should have
as
been
like
at
the
this
husband
point.
of Angelica, basically saying like I married a wealthy man and we're going to Europe, like, but I'm never gonna be satisfied without you. So I'm like, no, like you guys are like having like the fucking life.
What?
I'm gonna guess though that John had gotten the information about the affair from Alexander himself because the two
Because
of
they were
them,
close.
yeah, the two of them were very close confidants. If that's
Oh my
true,
goodness.
then I actually feel like John is actually a really great guy because he clearly felt
Yeah.
closer to the Schuyler family if he was willing to portray Alexander in order to warn Eliza about what was happening.
Yeah, like he's got his loyalties lined out and like he knows where they lie.
Yeah. So before we
Yeah.
get to Angelica's legacy, it's time for some juicy letters. So the flirty letters with Hamilton are absolutely true.
Mm.
But they've been talked about enough. We know a lot about them. The only part that I want to add is that Eliza actually protected her sister the best she could and didn't say a word about the letters that she knew were happening between her sister and husband.
Oh.
Like, the loyalty that this family has to each other is extraordinary and I respect it so friggin' much.
Yeah, seriously.
However, researchers are actually thinking that the so-called affair is actually more of a banter between Angelica, Alexander, and Eliza. That is not like a true love affair.
Yeah, there was actually that line about her saying like if you had the generosity of the Romans or something, then you'd like let him spend some more time with me or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember how exactly. I know it wasn't worded exactly like it was in the musical, but I can't remember exactly how it was worded.
The three of them seem to actually have like a really interesting banter. Like it's almost like kind of like the banter that like you and I might have, or that like we have like with some of our friends, right? Like where it's like the guys know like they're not actually doing anything. It's just this friendly banter and like inside jokes and stuff, right? Like we're fine. Yeah. That I think is actually probably about the same thing, but I think that most people want to see it as an affair rather than like that they're all complicit. These letters can be found through the Library of Congress if you want to read them for yourselves. Definitely let us know what you think on our Instagram, if it's an affair or if it's just a friendly banter. But I do want to cover some of Angelica's letters with Jefferson, Washington, and Lafayette. For anybody interested, I will be posting the links to the National Archives of the U.S., the Library of Congress, and the other archives that contain letters between all four men and Angelica. So let's start with Jefferson, shall we? There are a few letters between these two that also hint towards a more than friendly affection.
Oh my goodness, okay.
So the correspondence between them that is found in the National Archives spans from 1788 to 1802. Many pieces of the correspondence pertain to sending various people to each other. The first of the letters between them talk about sending Angelica's daughter Kitty back to her. Kitty lived with other girls in the home of Madame de Cornery, called the Panthémont Abbey, which is a convent school in France that Jefferson's daughters Martha and Mary attended.
Okay, so like family friends.
Yeah. What was interesting to note is that in the letter discussing Angelica taking Kitty to America, Jefferson mentions that he and the Madame will not allow her to take Kitty unless Angelica herself comes to collect her. His reasoning is that there's no other way of getting Angelica to come visit them. So basically, like, I'm going to blackmail you by holding your daughter hostage unless you yourself come so I can actually see you.
That's kind of wholesome. Like, that's like the kind of friend, like, yeah, that's like the kind of joke that like my friends and I have. It's like, I mean, I have a thing for you, but you have to come get it and hang out with me in order to get it. Like,
yeah. Yet in the same letter, he does go on to most likely piss Angelica off with this sentiment. You see by the papers, and I suppose by your letters also, how much your native state has been agitated by the question on the new constitution. But that need not agitate you. The tender breast of ladies were not formed for political convulsion, and the French ladies miscalculate much their own happiness when they wander from the true field of their influence into that of politics. Present my friendly compliments to Mr. Church, and accept yourself assurances of the sincere attachment and respect of dear Madame, your most obedient friend and servant, T.H. Jefferson. Obedient friend and service, my ass.
Bruh. Did he literally just say
that like the tender breasts of ladies are not formed for political convulsion?
Biologically, women can't handle politics. So you should just chill out and let the men deal with it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like,
Now, Angelica's next
come
letter
on.
to him is like super short and to the point, which makes me laugh, as she does make a dig at him about his mention of not thinking too much about the Constitution. So she says, "Idleness, my dear sir, we have long been told is the root of all evil. And I am an instance that is the cause of inattention to those one most values." And then later on, like a little bit later on, she goes, "The adoption of the new constitution accepted, I can tell you nothing that may please you. A decided taste for luxuries and no inclination to acquit their debts are not traits in their conduct likely to please those who are solicitous for the honor and welfare of Americans." Like, yes, Angelica, just give it to him. But perhaps don't end your letter by still saying that you hope he will think of you with affection, because whether or not he wants to take your advice, you will always have affectionate wishes for him.
Well,
like, you just took out your point.
I mean, that's just a fancy way of saying agree to disagree. And, like, I can stand by that sentiment, so...
And then the next letter in the archives has her admitting to being in great pain because he had been silent for so long. She also sends wishes that they will be in New York at the same time, which he responds that they sadly will not, but that he is in deep need of her solace. Later on in their correspondence, Angelica alerts Jefferson to the news that their friend Lafayette is in prison and drives home the point that they need Washington to assist, as it is the last hope for him and his family. It takes Jefferson from August to November before he responds about Lafayette.
Right.
And then his response is that his heart bleeds for their friend, but that he doesn't think America can do much for him, before moving on to his excitement over her possible return to America.
So this dude is like he's kind of got the hots for her. It sounds like he's like he's a little too focused on her and what she's doing rather than like the actual content of the letter.
Yeah. But like throughout some of
it might be a little one-sided.
Yeah, throughout some of their letters apparently that aren't online, so I couldn't get like direct quotes. But apparently through some of their letters, they would send, like, sexy quotes from, like, pieces of literature and stuff to each other.
Oh my word.
But what's interesting about their relationship is that Jefferson was flirting with both her and the woman who introduced them back in Paris, Maria Causeway. After his wife passed, Jefferson had intimate conversations with both women while also sending them similar gifts, including a portrait of himself painted by yet another mutual friend, John Trumbull. A letter from Angelica stated that while Maria had a better copy of the portrait, she held a better image of him in her heart. Sadly, apparently Jefferson's heart leaned way more towards Maria, so Angelica may have just been an easy, flirty conversation for him.
I'm gonna say it once, and I'm gonna say it with my chest. Jefferson is a fuckboy.
Yeah. I just find it, like, super interesting that, like, in Hamilton, we basically got about how much Hamilton hates Jefferson, and, like, even in letters from Hamilton to Angelica, like, basically dissing Jefferson, like, with the whole Macbeth quote and stuff. But then Angelica's having, like, this flirty relationship with both of them?
But maybe that's why.
Maybe.
If Hamilton has any kind of inkling that she's also flirting with Jefferson, it would make this kind of, like, love trio dynamic if there was any kind of actual flirtation behind Hamilton's, like, letters.
Yeah, maybe.
Even if it was one-sided, that wouldn't, like, I mean, there's so many things that they disagreed on, so that obviously wouldn't be the only reason, but it probably wouldn't have helped.
Yeah. The letters between Angelica and George Washington seem to be wrapped around her plea for assistance in Lafayette's release from prison. Unfortunately, the letter from Angelica to Washington has been lost, but there is record of the letter that he sent back in which he regrets not being able to say more than the fact that he received her letter.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't really have, like, when I heard that there's, like, all, like, these letters from them, I'm like, what is she talking about with Washington? Like, is she also flirting with Washington? Like, is she, like, literally that bored and, like, just sexting everyone?
Listen, it's either politics or flirting with, politicians, okay? That's all she's got time for.
Yeah. So, in a letter from Lafayette in 1799, he relates his affections towards her, writing that he is bound by sentiments of affection and gratitude before continuing on to discuss the French Revolution with her as a person of equal intellect. I
Okay.
say I ship her and Lafayette. If she's not having Alexander Hamilton or her actual husband, Lafayette is the man that I'm putting her with.
Lafayette just seems like a bamf. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
Like I kind of want to do an episode on Lafayette.
that would be fun. Their friendship and affections actually seem to be more deep and pure, even while he was imprisoned for being part of the French Revolution. And I also really like the way that he respected her intelligence, as most of her friends seem to do, unless you were Jefferson and literally being like, nope, you're a woman. You can't have thoughts on this. You shouldn't be worried about this stuff, because that's the men's job.
As if it doesn't affect us too. Like, that's the thing I'll never understand is like it has like politics have a direct impact on everybody's lives. So why would everybody not be equally valid in talking about it? That I'll never get that.
No. So while I wrap up what could be easily hours of just dissecting the letters, I do want to make a mention of Angelica's legacy that her son Philip left for her. So yes, we have like 3 or 4 Philips here in this family. So then I can sit back and learn about her second sister, Peggy. When the Schuyler church family were planning on moving back to America in 1797, John had accepted a mortgage on a ton of land against a debt that was owed to him by a friend. When the friend couldn't pay back that loan, the land then went to their oldest son, Philip, in a foreclosure sale. He went to that parcel of land and marked out a large portion of it to become a small village along the Genesee River. Okay. This village was named Angelica.
Aww, that's cute.
Angelica, New York had a population of just over 1,000 people in the 2010 census, so it's still a thriving small town.
Aww.
So even though like she didn't like have like a major hand in a pile of history, she has a friggin' town named after her because her son was like, "Hey, my mom's fucking cool. I'm gonna take this pile of land, and create a small village." And he actually when he did like the small village, he actually created it to look like a mini Paris because that's where they spent most of their like a good chunk of their time.
Wait, that's cute.
Yeah. So now I kind of want to go visit Angelica, New York, and just see like what this legacy has become.
Yeah, that's sweet. Aww. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you said, she may not have had like a direct hand in a lot of history, but it sounds like she had her fingers in a little bit of everything. You know, she was involving herself whether they wanted her to be there or not. And like,
well, both her and her husband. I mean, the man friggin' gave the guns.
Bro, like, you couldn't have stopped him and been like, hey, you probably should just, like, chill the fuck out, bro.
Well, I think apparently, like, he had done that with, Philip Hamilton's duel. But then when he couldn't actually stop the thing, he was like, well, here's my guns. Just use those. And then friggin' Hamilton uses the same guns that were used in his son's death. Like, the poor guy had enough happening in that spot. But he's literally using the same gun in the same spot.
Yeah. I wonder if he, like, took any responsibility for that. For, like, the way that those went down.
I have no idea. I didn't look, like, that deep into him. I was, like, trying to focus on Angelica, but I'm like, this dude has too much happening that, like, revolves, like, the two of them are part of, that I'm like, I can't. I have to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Shall we look at Peggy?
Sure, let's talk about Peggy. Ashley, what do you know about Peggy Schuyler?
Not much, other than she has a really cool name.
Yeah, well, no one else knows much more than that either, to be honest. Unfortunately. And I literally don't know how, because her family was so wealthy and affiliated with, like, so many influential people. But somehow Peggy seems to have kind of fallen through the cracks a little bit. Maybe it's a middle child thing. Well, I don't know.
I mean, like, she definitely has more on her than their other sisters, because I couldn't find, like, anything on the other 2 sisters. So at least she has more on them still. Like, she at least has a Wikipedia page.
Like, Peggy Schuyler has a Wikipedia? And Angelica doesn't?
Angelica has one, and Peggy has one, and Eliza has one. So, like, the 3 main Schuyler sisters, but, like, the other 2 sisters have, like, nothing.
I got what you mean. There's more than, like, on...
Cornelia and Catherine Schuyler.
Yeah, so Peggy's got more information than Cornelia and Catherine, I suppose. That's true. But there's still not a whole lot. Yeah, so we know a few things. We know her actual first name was Margarita, which was a name she shared with a number of family members. And so she went by either Meggie or Peggy. Most often I saw Peggy. She enjoyed the luxury of being raised in a wealthy and respected family. And I found letters in the National Archives describing her as wild, her family as amiable and hospitable.
She was the wild child.
Yeah, which is interesting because we've got like no information on how.
That was probably hidden, though. I think at that time you wanted to be the charming sister, not the wild sister. So they might have like hidden some of that. I don't know.
But like considering Angelica and all the stuff that she got into, like...
True.
I don't know. We have a letter from Hamilton to Peggy. We don't have any letters from Peggy to anybody. We don't have any journals from Peggy. We've got nothing in Peggy's own hand.
Okay.
But we've got some letters about her. So we have a letter from Hamilton to Peggy describing how Eliza was raving about her and told him that he had to make his acquaintance with her. In a letter from Eliza to Peggy later, shortly after Eliza's betrothal to Hamilton, Eliza goes on and on about how it's such a delight to be betrothed and Peggy should get betrothed as well and she should be getting married because it's such a wonderful time and she's so excited about it. And Hamilton adds in a PS that Peggy is under no obligation to do any such thing with just anybody and encourages her to be particular in who she chooses to marry because marriage is only happy if you pick the right person. He also says that in order to keep Eliza happy, he does encourage Peggy to get married, but just adding the qualifier of be cautious of the choice.
Okay. Like, I really like the big brother vibes, like...
Right? This is what I thought about their dynamic, too, that he must have seen her as, like, a little sister, because, like, that's really what came through. His standards for a good match for Peggy are also kind of interesting. Hamilton says a good match for Peggy would be, quote, a man of sense, not ugly enough to be pointed at, with some good nature, a few grains of feeling, a little taste, a little imagination, and above all, a good deal of decision to keep you in order. For that, I foresee, will be no easy task.
I love that.
Right? So clearly she's kind of a wild child, but we've got nothing describing what she's doing that's so wild. Which is like, I want to know what that was.
Maybe it's just like how she talked to people or something, like...
Maybe.
Like that she was a bit more of like, hey, I've got my own friggin' brain. But she wasn't as good at being like, I have a brain, but I'm gonna be sly about it. She would probably be more like the, look, you fucking around with the Constitution or what?
So we'll get into like her reputation about that a little bit in just a second here. Yeah, Hamilton concludes the note saying that if she finds a man who's like that, who's willing to marry her, marry him, quote, as soon as you please. And yeah, I just thought the interaction was so wholesome. Like, the happiness coming through those letters is palpable. Like, it's just so sweet. And, like, yeah, it's like we talked about. It really does have that big brother, little sister vibe. On the flip side, got a letter from James McHenry, who I don't know who that is, to Hamilton that mentions Peggy and kind of describes her in a sort of different way, like in a little bit more depth. He basically writes that everyone loves Angelica, but that Peggy has slightly less of a stellar reputation despite being, quote, perhaps a finer woman. Basically, he writes that women, like, men get along with Peggy just fine, but women don't get along with her so well because they're worried that Peggy considers them, quote, as Swift's Vanessa did, which is a reference to Jonathan Swift's poem describing a woman named Vanessa. And she had some not so pleasant views on women.
Okay.
Kind of just that they're like mindless, flightless creatures kind of thing. And so the women that Peggy knew weren't super fond of her. He goes on to suggest that if Peggy spent less time pleasing the men and more time pleasing the women, she'd be more universally loved like her sister, and asks Hamilton to pass on the message as he thinks that she'll listen to him.
Okay.
Right?
I'm not sure if Hamilton will pass that message along from what I've heard, though, from Hamilton.
I don't know. I don't really, like, I don't know. I don't really think that he would either. Unless he really, like, could see it and kind of agreed and was like, hey, you're pissing off a lot of these women. Like, maybe, like, stop being so friendly with their husbands.
Maybe.
And, like, getting along with them so well. Like, just dial it back a little. But he concludes on the subject saying that I am sure her good sense will soon place her in her proper station.
Nope. It's like Jefferson all over again.
So read that as you will. This is a thing, clearly, that the Schuyler sisters heard often. But yeah, it sounds like Angelica kind of danced around it a little bit better. And Peggy was just like, I do what I want. So this is the disappointing part of the story. This is the part where I got frustrated.
Okay.
Because there's a really popular legend about Peggy. And basically, like, this is her badass moment that everybody talks about, right? So the story goes that her family was attacked by a group of Tories and a local indigenous tribe who were targeting her father, intending to capture him as a prisoner of war. According to the story, Peggy's family ran upstairs to hide and barricade themselves, including the pregnant Angelica and Eliza, who were staying in the family house while their husbands were fighting in the war. Thing is, they realized a bit too late that the youngest Schuyler's sister, Catherine, who was only a baby at the time, was left downstairs in the panic. Peggy, who would have been 23 at the time, apparently ran down the stairs to rescue baby Catherine. The attackers had made it inside the house and asked her where her father was. She cleverly covered for him, saying that he'd left to alert the town of the attack. Apparently, this was enough to convince the attackers that reinforcements were on their way, and they left, but one of them, again, supposedly, threw a tomahawk at Peggy, who was running up the stairs with baby Catherine, and barely missed her. Story is that it sliced her dress and left a sizable scar in the stairwell railing, which the family left alone and, like, didn't fix as a memento of the whole event.
Wow. The poor
Right?
baby being, like, left there.
Right? Okay, so now here's the issue that I have with the story. If it really did happen that way, crazy feat of bravery, right?
Yeah.
Or, cleverness, impulsivity, whatever, depending on your take on this story. Like, what a person to run down into a house that's getting raided and, like, face all of that and be so, like, clever in the moment and cool-headed in the moment. Like, that's the kind of story that you would be telling your entire life about how you potentially, like, saved your baby sister's life.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's true, while it wasn't their goal necessarily to go in there and, like, kill people, it was their goal to kidnap the father, but they could have taken the baby as leverage, right? Like,
yeah.
So I generally love legends about people's feats of bravery, even if there's, like, a haze about whether or not it actually happened. But this one, we have next to no evidence that it happened. The first time that we see it written about wasn't until an article published nearly 30 years after Peggy died, which was, like, 50 years after the incident.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and you can still visit the Schuyler home. I found a blog and an article with a picture of the railing from two different angles and compared it to photos of, like, the Schuyler house from New York State's Parks and Rec website. And it seems legit. Like, it seems like it is, like, a close-up picture of the gash. The image shows a gash that I don't believe came from a thrown tomahawk.
Okay.
I like, my first reaction when I saw it was that, like, I've chopped enough firewood growing up that, like, the first hit of like, an axe or anything does not make a chip that wide. And so I don't think that it could have been made by a tomahawk that was thrown at her. That makes a precise slice. It would, like, split the wood maybe, but it wouldn't make it wider.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like it was hit once and then hit again to make, like, a divot in it.
So like, maybe they kind of, like, made it themselves?
This is the thing. It looks fabricated. And my gut instinct was, like, this doesn't feel legit.
Or was it maybe that, like, maybe the actual, like, if the actual events kind of happened, maybe they didn't actually throw it at her. Maybe somebody actually got close enough and, like, tried to slice it at her or something. But then she maybe with the trauma of it, maybe they just kind of, like, made it that it was, like, a thrown that she didn't. I don't know.
Like, I could see it being swung at her, but to hit it that way, it looks almost intentional. Like, it gave me a bad gut feeling that, like, this looks like it was fabricated. Mm-hmm. And so, just to be sure, I found a video on YouTube of a guy throwing a modern tomahawk to talk about its effectiveness as a weapon, both held and thrown, to compare the difference.
Okay.
And at the end, he compared it to a gun because America, I guess, but that's not really, like, super relevant here. So.
Yeah.
But the video was listed as a source. It just confirmed what I suspected. Tomahawks are fantastic slashing weapons. They do a ton of damage, like, swinging them. But the guy in the video refers to throwing them as a party trick in comparison. Like, it still do damage, but it's much less effective. So it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yeah.
That it would be used in that way. And it doesn't necessarily make sense that it would, like, chop it that way if it was. Yeah. The story doesn't make sense, is what I'm getting at.
Interesting.
And like maybe it's the effect of wood chipping over 200 years. Maybe it's the effect of this or that. But it looks too smooth and it looks too finished and it looks off.
Yeah.
So my suspicion is that the story is made up, or at least like overblown. And this is why I think that matters. So Albany's cemetery seems to think that the story was made up by Peggy's mother and uses racist propaganda against the local native tribes. And that she fabricated the whole story about how the local tribes attacked her house and attacked her family, and Peggy had this feat of bravery, and that's the only reason they survived, as a means of getting everyone else to also hate the local tribes.
I mean, for the timing, that's definitely plausible.
Right? There were some tribes nearby that were like peaceful to people nearby as well, and the tribe that they blamed it on was one that was opposed to them. I believe the Albany Cemetery website said it was because they were in protest about how the colonizers were going against the agreement that they had in place about like protecting the local tribes, which also makes sense and is like justified. So it's like, yeah, I mean, they also didn't have any like sources listed for their article about Peggy, so I don't really have any evidence either way. But it leaves us with this story where on the one hand, if it happened, cool story, why was it not written down anywhere? And especially considering her notable family, and like why was she not like recognized for it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But if it didn't happen, then it's like just like a little bit too likely that it was intentionally racist war propaganda.
Yeah.
Right? And this is like the only cool story that we have about her. And then it's like, okay, did she know that it was like her story was being used like this, or like was she just like a pawn in the whole matter? Like how much of a role does she have to play? And like it raises questions that are just kind of like, it's like, I want this character to be a really cool character, and there's too many like morally questionable things about this particular story.
No, I agree.
So the best case scenario from my perspective is that it happened, it was just exaggerated at some point, and it wasn't as exciting as it seems. But like even that's kind of disappointing, because like I've said, this is like the one story that everyone talks about and where we really like see her boldness, like very tactfully or tactically. But then at least it wouldn't be like outright harmful from the very beginning, even if it was used that way later, right? Like, so this is where I got frustrated with this, because I was like, come on.
I mean, I would totally get frustrated too, because I'm like, that is such a cool story.
Right?
And so, right, like, I would want that to be true and have evidence of it being true, but then...
Yeah.
Especially, like, if I saw that, like, could it even be that because of that article coming out or whatever, and then once the house became a museum, that they put it, that they friggin', like, as a museum person's bigger, heart... Right? It would break if they actually, like, possibly, or somebody, like, made a chunk in here to make the story look true.
Right? But
like it's a historical building.
Right? Like, this is what I'm feeling, too. Like, it would have looked more realistic to me, having seen the effect of an axe. And granted, an axe and a tomahawk are not exactly the same, and they're going to do different things. But, like, they're both slicing. They don't, like, wedge anything on the first hit. Like, that's not how it works. So, like, it would be like, here's this big heritage house that we're going out of our way to protect as a monument, and let's intentionally mar it to exaggerate a story. Like, that just seems like unethical.
Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't agree with that.
I really hope that's not what not how it went down. I would really like to believe better in people, but we have a whole world full of history showing us that that's kind of naive. So yeah. So like, it's a cool story, but it's just like forever tainted by this like something about this is wrong.
Well, I mean, like, if Peggy had done something like that, I would hope then that the family would name something after her. Like, Angelica got a whole friggin', like, little town of, like, just over 1,000 people for not saving somebody.
This is what I mean. It's not anywhere. Like, there's no, like, newspaper articles at the time talking about it. It's not mentioned in any of the letters that we do have about Peggy. Like, we have nothing mentioning this event. I'd be talking about this all the damn time.
Well, and you'd think that, like, if Alexander Hamilton was such, like, a big brother, that he would have, like, written something to say, like, hey, I hope you're doing okay after this event. Like...
Yeah, like, seriously. Like, especially since the first letter that we have from Hamilton to Peggy is him talking about how Eliza is just glowing about her. You'd think that he'd mention it there, right? Like, there's no way she wouldn't mention that at that point if it already happened. Or no, I guess they weren't married at the point when the first letter happened. Right, so that would make sense. But like,
yeah, but like
if he
at
wrote
some
a
point,
letter glowing about her based on like a reputation from her sister, there's no way that he wouldn't mention her doing this later, right?
yeah.
Right. So, rant about Peggy's legend out of the way. So there is one place where her tenacity really does shine through, though, that we have record of,
Okay.
and that's in her marriage. Multiple Schuyler sisters eloped, I found. Angelica, as well as I think it was Catherine, the youngest, eloped as well. And I think in her case, her husband like went up in and like climbed into her window to like scoop her up and get her out so that they could go elope and run off together, which is
that's
really
fun.
cute.
Dangerous, but fun.
Yeah, for sure. So in Peggy's case, though, we know that she married a man named Stephen. Listen, this is a very Dutch name. I am Dutch. I'm still gonna butcher this. Stephen van Rensselaer III, who was a distant cousin on her mother's side. And this seemed to be a very controversial event, but not because they're cousins, because, you know, why would that matter? But more so because she was 25 and he was 19.
So she was cradle robbing.
Yeah, so it was a weird age gap. So a number of Stephen's friends and Peggy's father agreed that Stephen was too young. 19 was too young for a man to get married. It was just fine for a woman to get married at 19, but 19 was too young for a man to get married, which is kind of sus that it's only a problem when the roles are reversed. But then on the other hand, it is a bit of an odd gap, so I do feel kind of iffy about it. So despite the controversy and her father's disapproval, the couple eloped, and that move seemed to really pay off. In all other ways, it was a good match. They were both wealthy and from prestigious families. It seemed that their marriage was good for Stephen's career as well. And in 2011, Business Insider ranked him as the 10th wealthiest American of all time.
Wow.
So the man was rich by the end of his life. So Peggy and Stephen had 3 children together, but only one survived into adulthood.
Okay.
And it happened to be Stephen's namesake. So in 1799, around the age of 40, Peggy fell ill, and after being sick for 2 years, passed away in the care of Hamilton, who had to write the letter breaking the news to Eliza.
Oh.
She was 42 at the time. She left behind her wealthy husband, who did go on to remarry and have more kids, and her son, who also went on to be successful in his own right, and that's pretty much it. We don't really know anything about her beyond that. So here's my thing about Peggy's story. I'm confused by this narrative that I've been seeing everywhere since Hamilton blew up, that Peggy is secretly the super fascinating character, because it doesn't really seem to be founded in much of anything. She's got a wild side, for sure, but it doesn't seem that beyond this one legend about her, like, it doesn't seem like we really have anything to back that up.
I remember, like, you were so excited to research her, and then you were texting me and, like, freaking out about how there's, like, nothing that you could find. I'm like, oh my god, no!
See, this is the thing. This is what I mean. I was seeing everywhere about this cool legend. Peggy saved a baby. And, like, I was like, okay, cool. This girl must have some, like, stories to tell. And then there were none.
Yeah.
Like, anywhere. And, like, I mean, clearly more than her, like, her baby sisters. But nothing. And I kept seeing all this stuff about, like, Peggy was really interesting too, guys. Don't overlook Peggy. Just because she doesn't appear that much in Hamilton doesn't mean she didn't live a really interesting life. But then I couldn't find any of that. Like, but I mean, like, that's okay, right? Like, I don't think she needs to have been, like, working with her father as a spy or secretly having an affair. Like,
yeah.
Like, I think it's perfectly fine to have a normal life and a common story. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But what confuses me is that so many people seem to think that because she's in the musical, she absolutely has to be exciting. Like, it's like a requirement. Like, almost like she doesn't have any merit if she isn't. Like, right? Like, isn't it weird? Like, she's in the musical because at the time, at the time that the musical takes place, the 3 sisters were practically inseparable. People called them the Schuyler sisters because they were close in age and they were always hanging out with each other. It would have been weird to exclude Peggy from that.
Yeah, it definitely would have been weird, right? And I mean, it kind of makes a little bit more sense that she didn't get as much musical time as Angelica and Eliza did if there wasn't a lot to back up like interesting stories, right? Like I bet like if Lynn had been able to find an actual interesting story that he could be like, yes, this has some merit of truth, he would have probably put it in there.
Right? Or at least a nod to it or a reference to it or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like she was very much like her, like, okay, so her sisters did really cool things, right? Like they married influential men and they did amazing things in their own right? Like even outside of the men that they married, they did really cool stuff. But Peggy seems to have always just been living her life in the background. And like, that's okay. And it feels weird to me that people don't seem to think that that's like okay.
Yeah.
Like, she quietly married her husband. She didn't make a lot of noise. Like, she had this wild personality if you met her, but like, she didn't like, she wasn't splashing on like the news headlines, and she wasn't as involved in politics and all this other stuff, right? Like, she was just kind of like doing her thing and living her life. It was her goal to marry wealthy, and she did. It was her goal to marry like well socially, and she did. It was her goal to like set her kids up for a good life, and she did. And that's kind of it, and that's fine. But her sisters did do like really cool stuff, and Peggy would have had the same opportunity to do all that cool stuff. She met all the same people. She was friends with all the same people. Like, she had the opportunity to, like, if she wanted to marry someone who was going to whisk her away to France, she had the opportunity to meet people who were like that, right?
Yeah.
But she chose not to. She very specifically chose her husband. She ran off and eloped with him even when everyone else was telling her no. Like, she controlled her narrative, like, maybe not her narrative, like the narrative of her life as she was living it, maybe not the narrative of her legacy, but like she could have had that crazy exciting life, and she chose not to. And so to me, that tells me that she didn't want one. And then so for people now to be like, well, her legacy is super cool, it's super exciting, it feels like it's like disingenuous. So I mean, all this being said, like, you know, we'll never know her actual intentions. We don't have, like I said before, we don't have any journals or letters from her. So, like, we'll never actually really know. And it could all just be like me projecting, because I'm very much one of those people who's like very okay with just like being in the background and like not being in the spotlight. Like, I've mentioned to you before, like, I like the idea of writing a book, but if I were to ever publish it, I'd probably publish it under a pen name, because I don't want, like, realistically want that.
Yeah, no, same here. I mean, like, I want to have a book, but I do want it under like a pen name, just so that I have my personal life and then my social life. Right?
And this is ironic, because we're literally recording a podcast right now, and I have a Twitch channel, so...
But I think those are different things.
Also, it's a different thing. Like, literally, I've talked about it on my Twitch streams before. If I ever exploded and got to the size of, like, Valkyrie, or... Disguised Toast, or like any of like Ludwig, any of the big streamers, if I ever got to that level, I would probably panic and quit. I might delete my channel. I don't know that I could handle that very well.
I think like having these things where you can do them for fun, people aren't going to have this high expectation on us. Like, I see all of these authors who become like the big names, and then they have such high expectations that then people go over the top, threatening them and their families because they don't do what they're being told to, like what the audience wants them to do. Where I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with that.
No.
That's why I'm like, okay, pen name. Like, sure, you can threaten my pen name that has no children or whatever, right? Like, sure, threaten my pen name, but do not threaten me and my family. Like, I have my personal life, and then I'll have, like, my famous life, if you can call it that. Like,
you'd be able to separate them so much more, like so much more easily, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that kind of comes back to, like, how we want to, like, treat people that we talk about on this podcast, and we, like, what we've been doing since day one, where we want to talk about the person's merit based on who they were and what they've done, and not just, oh, this girl is interesting because she married this guy or that guy, or, like, but get to who, like, they actually are.
Yeah.
Which, like, I just couldn't find a lot of that with Peggy.
Well, and, we want to find that, but we want to also make sure we have, like, the resources to back it up.
Exactly.
So, like,
I want it to be genuine.
Yeah, like, here's who they actually were, and here's the actual resources from the time, the primary sources that can tell you that this is who they probably were.
Exactly. So I did think that it was like a little bit too bad that we couldn't see more of Peggy's personality, because it does sound like she was a bit of a wild child, and that would be interesting. But like a wild child in like a kind of normal sort of way. Like,
Yeah.
you can be a wild child without leaving a massive mark, and like you can be fun and exciting and like not be legendary, right? And that's it's fun. It's fine to be fun and exciting in the background. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, just let people be, you know?
Exactly.
So I wish we had more like from her specifically. So I have a note for the viewers. If you're listening, start journaling. I'm serious. Keep them safe. Because no one can tell your story better than you can, and some historian in 100 years is going to thank you so much for your boring, everyday insight on what is going on today. Because these are the things that we miss.
I can vouch for that, because that's one of my favorite things. Like, as I've been in different archives or like I'll tour in archives, and the archivist will be like, hey, here's this really cool person. I'm like, who's this person? And they're like, well, that's just like some random person. I'm like, great, I want to know their story. I already know about this other person. So yes, we want to, like, as a historian / archivist frame of mind, we do want just the average Joe's stories, because that actually tells us more about the society than the famous people's stories.
Exactly. And I think about this all the time when I write, like, myself as well. And like, I have a collection of all of my journals. I've been keeping journals since I was a kid. I have all of them. And I had an ex question, like, why do you keep all these things? Like, you have journals from when you're going through such dark times. Why do you keep them? And like, this is my story. This is my legacy. This is what happened to me. That's not changing just because like it got better. That's great. I'll write about how it got better, but like, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I don't know. Lost to the tides of time.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, so that was Angelica and Peggy. And then for next week, we're going to do something a little bit different, because we had a plan of doing Theodosia Burr and then also Evangeline Hamilton. However, the amount of stuff that I have found on Evangeline Hamilton is going to take us like a full episode. So we're going to do a single episode on Evangeline, and then we will be doing some mini episodes, which we will touch on Theodosia Burr, because Theodosia and then her daughter, also named Theodosia, are still interesting people. So we will definitely cover them in mini episodes. But next week, we're going to go into the scandalous life of Evangeline Hamilton. And I am super excited to share this with you guys and with Kat, in which I am sure there's going to be a lot of good discussion, even though it's just the one historical figure.
I know nothing about Evangeline, and the way that you've hyped her up, I'm so excited to hear this.
Yeah, and I'm very excited to tell it to you. So until next time.
See you on the weird side of history.